Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I am here with another long list review from this year's Women's Prize for Nonfiction. And today's title is 1,000 Threads by Neneh, and this is a memoir. Now, this was a book that I almost decided that I wasn't going to read. If it wasn't one that I had easily available to me, I was just gonna skip it. And I am so glad that I had a copy available to me because this memoir was fantastic. I cannot believe that I was so invested in a memoir of someone that I really didn't know too much about. My knowledge of Neneh leading up to this memoir was that she is responsible for the absolute banger Buffalo Stance. And I'm a kid from the 80s and that song still lives rent-free in my head. I absolutely love that song. I always have. And every time I hear it, it just takes me back. I love it. And I knew she was responsible for that. So I was like, yeah, I like that song. Maybe we'll talk about that song and how she came to create it. But this book was so much more than that. And it totally caught me off guard how much I enjoyed this. I was immediately drawn into her story. She starts the book by talking about her parents' relationship. So she has her Swedish mother, Moki, and then she has her father who was from Sierra Leone, and she talked about their relationship, how they came together. Her father was a musician, her mother was a fabric artist or a tapestry artist, and she talked about how they came together, a little bit about their love affair, and then also how they kind of parted ways. Her father was not faithful and had a life of his own, although her mother was very much in love with him. She realized that she wasn't going to be able to tie him down, so she let him go. Very shortly after, Moki met her stepfather, who was Don Cherry, and they once again had a great relationship at the beginning, but Moki struggled as well as her children with Don because Don was a well-known musician and he struggled with addiction, specifically heroin. So we learn a lot about Neneh's story as a young kid dealing with that. So she has a biological father who's no longer part of the picture. She has a very loving stepfather that is struggling with these demons, and Moki is a total badass. Like, this woman, she was a force to be reckoned with, and you could tell so much the love that Neneh had for Moki throughout the duration of this book. So it's not just the story about Neneh, but it is the story about her relationship with her mother as well. I was nervous going into this. Like I said, I'm not very familiar with Neneh, except, like I said, I loved her song, but I quickly realized that she just has such an interesting story to tell. This touches on, as I mentioned, her family, the relationship she had with her parents, her mother, her father, her stepfather. She also has a brother named Eagle Eye Cherry, who is also a musician. You may have heard that name before. She came from a very worldly family. They were always moving across the globe somewhere. So this book takes us from Sweden, it takes us to Africa, it takes us to New York, California, so many different places. And once we start to get into Neneh's story, we're talking a lot about her identity, her being a biracial woman or a biracial kid at the start of the story, and how that impacted her, how she was seeing the world through the eyes of people that were judging her mother and her father for having a child together or being in an interracial relationship. But she also was struggling with her Swedish roots, trying to live in that area, being a biracial child, but then also her struggling with her African roots as well, not really knowing where she truly belonged, and her going on a quest to find the physical place in the world where she felt most at home and like she belonged or was a part of. I absolutely loved the narrative about her origin story for her music and how that developed. I mentioned that her father, her biological father, was a musician, and then Don Cherry was a very well-known musician in the jazz scene, so she was constantly surrounded by musicians of influence, and she very quickly started to meet her tribe of friends and talked about her evolution into the punk scene and then the hip hop scene, and eventually, you know, her becoming a singer, songwriter, musician. That was a really fun part of this story as well. And it was very interesting. And I will say, like, I didn't know much about this woman, but she just, even if you don't know her or you never have heard of her, she just has such a damn interesting story to tell. And I have so much respect for this woman after having read her story. And it's not necessarily just a story about herself. Like I said, it's all about her family too. And unfortunately, we get to the point toward the end of the story where she is dealing with the loss of her parents, and we're touching on her grief and how she handled that and what she turned to as far as her coping mechanisms go. And we're there for her during the birth of her children and her grandchildren. And it was just kind of like this beautiful full circle story. And it was raw and it was exposing, and it really reinforces to me that we all have a story. I really need to start giving memoirs more of a chance. I love memoirs, but I tend to stick to the people that I know, and I am just excited now because this is making me want to pick up and read stories about more people. There are so many times when I'm in bookstores and I see a list of memoirs by a bunch of people that I have never heard of, and I'm one of those people that will immediately dismiss those as books that I don't want to read. But having read this one by someone that I knew the name, but I wasn't really too familiar with, and then last year there was a long-listed memoir, actually shortlisted memoir by Safia Sinclair, whom I didn't know anything about prior to reading that book, but that was one of the most beautiful books and memoirs that I've ever read. And this is the second year in a row that the Nonfiction Prize has introduced me to a memoir that has absolutely blown my mind, and I maybe need to start paying more attention to some of those memoirs that I'm seeing on the bookshelves, because I think what's so fascinating is that even though these people are in the public image or they might be celebrities, oftentimes there are parallels in their life journeys for ordinary people like myself. As I was reading A Thousand Threads, there were a lot of times, even though we come from very different backgrounds, we lead very different lives, there were parts of her story that I very much related to, and I felt seen reading some of them. So yeah, I am so glad that I picked this up. I would definitely recommend this book if you're a fan of memoirs, even if you're not familiar with her. Like I said, I was gripped within the first 5 to 10 pages, and I ended up flying through this book in an afternoon. It was so good. But definitely, if you are a fan of hers, pick this up. You're not going to be disappointed. And so far, the first 2 books I have picked up from this long list have been fantastic. So I'm really hoping that I can keep that momentum up and that the rest of the books are just as good. And until we read again, bye.